All right, welcome back to Sheldog's Journey of Hope and our friend Sheldon Penner, aka the Sheldog. Great to see you again, Sheldon.
Oh,
And
how are you?
we're doing awesome. And I see
Oh,
you brought an
great.
awesome friend with you. Jorin Green's with us as a guest today on Sheldog's Journey of Hope. And
Oh,
we want to get a little introduction on Jorin, welcome. It's great to have you with us today, and give us a little bit of an introduction of who you are and a little bit of where you're at.
yeah. How did you meet? Yeah.
You know, you and I've gone around that bush a couple of times, Sheldon. So I am a pastor here in the city of Saskatoon in Saskatchewan. Been here a couple of years, arrived in COVID. Sheldon, I think you and I actually went to Bible school together in the 90s back in Regina. I know different places our paths crossed over the years, but I think where we really connected was in our time when we were both hanging out around Miller. I was on staff at Miller College of the Bible, and you took a number of classes, did some lecturing for me, and then we also did some touring together. I think there was a Breakforth weekend in there one time as well, where you hung out with you hung out with my touring team. You came as a speaker with the touring team. So we got some history together, doing some ministry together.
Oh,
Well,
yeah.
I'm sure you guys have some stories on each other that won't be won't be shared on this broadcast.
Oh,
So listen, Sheldon, tell us a little bit of where you want to go today on this podcast. What are some of the goals you want to have today on this as we talk with Jorin?
no. Yeah. Yeah. How was how 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 how
Yeah, great. So let's just fire some questions at Jorin. So Jorin, you're on the hot seat today with Sheldon, and he's
uh,
just gonna fire some questions at you. So let's go for it, Sheldon.
So the question of helping somebody with a disability who comes to our ministry, I've only been back in pastoral ministry for a couple of years, so this is a new context for me. And with COVID was already ongoing. We were shut down when I arrived, so we're just starting to see kind of a sense of normal return to our services. So I'm curious to see what this is going to look like in my local church. Having been at the college over the years, we had various students with different needs coming, some emotional, some intellectual, a number who were physical. And so then the struggle becomes to how do I identify people? How do I draw them out to share what they need and what their story is, so that I can understand who they are, I can understand how best to care for them and how best to empower them.
Yeah.
And I see that as an issue in my local church now that we're going to be watching for.
how
Answer them in their pain. This is a really tough question, because to answer somebody in their pain, I actually have to try and enter into their pain. And my experience has been sometimes we don't like to share our pain. And I think that's pretty universal with people. I'll get an email, somebody saying, hey, can you pray for me? I've got something going on in my life, but I don't want other people to know. And so I don't know how many people have in the past just simply suffered in silence. For those who actually come and are willing to share that, to answer in their pain, for me, it always starts with trying to get them to talk about it. What's happening? What is going on? To recognize everybody's pain is different. To recognize suffering is unfortunately part of our nature as fallen human beings. And you kind of process, okay, where would Jesus enter into this? We've got some beautiful examples all through the Gospels of how he answered people in their pain. I'm intrigued as we move into Acts that we realize Jesus didn't heal everybody. The lame man in the temple had been there for decades. which means he was sitting there when Jesus was going to the temple and he hadn't been healed. So helping to process and ask, what would Jesus be saying to them, and where's the redemption in it? Because we
Yeah,
sometimes think pain is bad.
yeah, I think that's awesome, Shell. Why don't we fire a couple more questions at Jordan and then circle back on that whole healing aspect? I think we want to circle back to that later on in this conversation. So a couple more, Sheldon, fire away.
What would I like to know about people before I meet them? I actually like to go into meeting people somewhat as a blank slate and draw them out, because then I'm not flavored by somebody else's experience with them, because my experience might be different. It is helpful to know, though, if they will disclose what's going on, because sometimes it can be really, sometimes you can get surprised, and sometimes you make mistakes or make assumptions that are not appropriate. I know, because I'm thinking especially of some of our interactions and some of our experiences. One of my college and career guys was saying last night, he was telling the college and career I was doing a podcast with someone with a speech challenge, and the youth group, the college and career group, I think thought he was kidding, because people make assumptions, and yet you and I first met in college. So we make assumptions about abilities, we make assumptions about limitations, we make all kinds of assumptions. So for me, the biggest thing is to actually take the time to stop and say, who are you? What do you need me to know? And how can I come alongside you and see you for who God has made you to be?
That's really good. Yeah,
Yep.
here's another question. What about people that have had a disability, and what's your experience with people with disabilities in your ministry? That's a great question, Sheldon.
I really like this one. And this one got me reflecting back to my elementary school days. I was growing up, I was in just outside of Vancouver. And in our school, we had a program for those with special needs that were segregated off. But at noon hours, they would often have us partner together. So they would partner somebody in that program with somebody in the mainstream, trying to do trying to do integration. This was an early attempt back when group homes were a much more normal thing, and different approaches were being done back, we're talking 70s into the early 80s. So I still remember grade 2, grade 3 sitting at lunch with kids that were coming over from some of these other programs in our school. Some of them were nonverbal. I think looking back, probably nonverbal autistic, but I don't know. One of our girls in my Awana program had spina bifida and was in a wheelchair, and we did a lot of stuff as families together. But then also in my teen years, I'm from a track and field family, and the Special Olympics in my hometown for a number of years came over, and we actually trained together with the Special Olympics athletes. And with Special Olympics, you've got so many different categories based on what abilities the athlete has, what challenges they're facing. And that was fabulous, because we had quite a number of them, and some of them were just superb athletes, disciplined, and really taught me a lot about how to talk to people, how to share with people, how to make myself available, and get over some of my own fears.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And let's circle back to this idea, and you kind of touched on it already. And Sheldon has another question, and this is the $1 million Sheldon question here. What about the whole concept of healing comes up with somebody with a disability? And I mean, you're a veteran theologian here and a pastor. How would you communicate that one?
I think you and I sat over McDonald's in Edmonton and had this conversation, or started to have this conversation, if I'm remembering correctly. I don't answer this question as a theologian, but my theology definitely writes it. I haven't had a lot of people with a a long-term disability ask this question per se. I've often had to face it with people with illness, where it's something where their life has changed and now they're forced to ask this question of healing. But I think it's a question that needs to be asked a little bit more. I see this question actually through the lens of my daughter. My daughter's actually at camp right now. When she was about 7, my wife and I decided to go on date night. And we had one of our Bible school students, because we were serving at Miller College at the time, come over and babysit. And my daughter at the time was bald. She was in the middle of chemotherapy. She had leukemia, a very serious situation, multiple years. And we got home from the date and our babysitter had kind of this haunted look in her eyes. And I said, well, what happened? She goes, Catherine asked me why God let me get cancer. And I didn't know what to say. And to me, that is still a beautiful memory. And we're still friends with the babysitter and we still laugh about it. And I said, well, what did you say? And she said, I don't know. To which my then 7-year-old said, okay, and went off and played. And that was sufficient for her. I think sometimes we ask this question in different ways at different times for different reasons. I always come back to the cross. The cross stands as my forgiveness. The cross stands as the promise of my healing.
Oh, yeah.
And, some of it I'm very influenced by the music I listened to growing up. One of my favorite bands is Striper, who takes their name from Isaiah 53. By his stripes or by his wounds, we are healed. And I'm in the Alliance Church. Sorry? Yeah.
The why now? Oh, why? Yeah.
To me, this is why I tie it back to the cross, because I've been declared not guilty by the work of Jesus. I am now called a saint. I have been given the Spirit of God. I am called to be Jesus' hands and feet in the world. I'm called to live this new life. And yet I still sin. And the number of mentors in my life in their 70s, 80s, 90s who still say, I wish I was sinless. For me, the only solution, the only answer I have come to for any of us is we live in the are and the not yet. God has promised we will be healed. God has promised we will be sinless. God has promised he will restore all things. But the fullness of the kingdom has not come yet, and we are waiting for that day. And for me, I read Revelation 22 as that constant promise. Someday I will be sinless. Someday I will be free. My sickness and suffering and all the sorrow of this world was nailed to the cross with Jesus, and we wait for the new heavens and the new earth and eternity.
Oh, yeah.
And I love that image in Revelation. The leaves of the tree are for the healing of the nations, and that promise. That's the only answer I've got, Sheldon.
Yeah. And, this one, I think theologians have wrestled with their entire existence. And, that healing is part of that whole cross experience, that by his stripes we are healed. And I didn't know you're a Striper fan, by the way. That even just brings more clarity to our relationship. So, Sheldon, let's go to a couple more. And there's a famous saying that you always say, don't ever judge a book by its cover, right? And so how does this saying need to be applied with people as they face others who may be different? Jorin, that's a great question, Sheldon.
How?
Mm-hmm. I'm going to pick on you for a second, because you and I've talked about some of your embarrassing exchanges, and you weren't the one who was embarrassed. It was somebody else was embarrassing themselves, making assumptions. If we don't take time to get to know somebody, if we don't attempt to actually connect with them meaningfully as a fellow image bearer, how will we ever know who they are and what they bring? So, Sheldon, you and I have talked about this. Again, I think we were in McDonald's talking about this, and you were sharing how some people just didn't know how to relate to you, made assumptions about your ability. And I love I love the whole idea of, you come in and you're teaching a college class. I've watched you be the speaker at weekend retreats, leading young people through things. I had one student one time, a small, petite little gal, kind of a high-pitched voice, and you were lulled into this false sense of security with her until you said something stupid, and she would dismantle you intellectually because she was brilliant. And you would judge based on appearance and not be intimidated or anything. And she was actually quite intimidating. Godly, wise young lady. We've got to be so careful to stop and ask, who are you? Do I know you? Am I sharing myself with you, and I am receiving you sharing yourself back with me, so that I see you as God made you and you see me as God made me? Because we often judge people, and I get this all the time. People make assumptions because I was a college professor and I lectured for 17 years. There's assumptions that go with that. Some of them are valid, some of them are not valid. So we need to actually stop and connect as people.
Yeah, I love that. And I think it really comes down to who defines what disabled is. And this is kind of what Sheldon's next two questions are about, right? So let's just look at this. Do you think that really all of us are disabled in some way or another? That's a great question, Sheldon. And in what ways might we all be disabled? I mean, there's a great question. And as a leader and as a pastor, you're dealing with both parishioners and people coming to you with questions. What about that? That's a great question, Sheldon.
And I actually think that question goes to the heart of our needing to be more self-aware, because we all have things that don't work in our lives. We have things that emotionally don't work, that physically don't work. I'm watching friends, I'm watching family get older. I'm pushing 50 myself, and things don't work the way that they once did.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know, because I think you and I are the same age. Is that a disability? Well, no, but there's things I cannot do today that I could do 20 years ago. I actually live with a chronic back injury, and I'm missing some mobility in one of my legs. Is that a disability? It doesn't actually really affect me, but sometimes it does. What about someone struggling with mental health issues? And we're seeing this, especially coming out of COVID, this massive proliferation of mental health challenges, and people realizing that maybe physically everything's intact, but emotionally they're not doing so well. We all care. I'm really noticing everyone carries pain, everyone carries hurt. I've never met anyone who in a moment of personal clarity would say, I feel understood and recognized by all of my peers. I feel like I can put my whole self out there, and I feel like everything in my life works. I've never met anyone who says that. But sorry?
Go ahead. It's kind of like we realize that the more self-aware we become, the more frail we realize we are, right? And the more we need the incredible love of Christ to kind of intersect our lives, and the grace flows out of our self-awareness, right?
Exactly.
So you're a pastor in a local church. So how do you, as a local church leader, and maybe there are other local church leaders that are going to tune into this as well, how do you help people with disabilities know that they're loved and taken care of in your ministry? I think that's the Sheldon's next question for us, Shell? And there's a follow-up to that one too, and that is really, how do you bring hope and acceptance to that person, but also to their family, because you're dealing with the family unit? Sheldon, those are great questions that you present to Jorin today.
Yep. And I really like that second one about the family, because we often focus on individuals, but my experience is we come from our family unit, whatever that family unit might look like. How do you let someone know in your ministry? I think the first thing, and I'm really challenged by this as a pastor, I need to be very careful to see the people in front of me. And when I say that, I mean intentionally recognize who they are, intentionally attempt to connect with them. I'm in a big enough church, I can't know everybody, but I have really felt, felt a sense from the Lord of being very cautious to not always go to the people I would naturally gravitate towards, the people who have something to offer me all, it's the ironies of this where we assume it's all about us. Really have this sense of being careful to take time to know my people, connect with them meaningfully, and then ask that question, how can we help you in your journey with Christ? While also asking them, how can you help me in my journey with Christ? And I've really been challenged on that on a personal level. And again, yeah, it's that authentic relationship. And in bigger churches, it's easy to hide behind non-authentic facades and we're not being serious about our relationship, or they're very surface level. And I'm aware I can't have a deep relationship with everyone in my congregation, but being very mindful in the moment of who today does God have me to connect with.
Yeah.
And realize when I connect with others, it's often for my sake more than theirs.
Yeah, that's great. And, the family unit as a whole are always impacted by that person in their family that may be challenged or may have the disability. And I think what we need to understand is that they come to church, they leave, they're still with the situation that they're involved in. And it's key for us to say, how do we best support? How do we best love? How do we best accept what's happening in your home? All right. So we're going to do a couple of quick things as we wind up our time together with Jorin, and that's going to be some tips for pastors and leaders as they are engaging with people with disability in their congregations. So Sheldon, Jorin, take it away. Give us 4 or 5 really good tips. All right. So let's go. Tip number 1.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
That one's yeah.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah. I think that's fantastic.
Yeah. Yeah, man. Wow. Yeah, man. Wow.
Yeah, that's an incredible thing. If we understand the unconditional love of God, how much that would change in our relationships with others. Sheldon, you're right on. So, Jorin, why don't you lead us in prayer, and any of our leaders and pastors that are dealing with issues, we can just encourage them today. Thanks for joining us today. Sheldon, thanks for those awesome questions. And Jorin, why don't you just lead us in prayer? Would you do that?
Yes, let's pray. Gracious God, thank you so much for Sheldon, for the years we have had ministering together. Pray a blessing over him and his ministry, and for Brian as well. Lord, thank you that we could have this conversation. And Father, would you guide us in asking, how do we see? How do we recognize? How do we engage with one another meaningfully, with compassion, with hope, with faith, with trust, to give of ourselves and to receive, to walk together as brothers and sisters by your grace and by your mercy. You died for us. We are your people. Teach us how to better walk together and to better honor and to better serve one another for your honor and glory and for our sake, holy God. Amen.
Amen. All right. We'll see you next time. Thanks, Sheldon.
Bless.
Thanks, Jorin. Have a great day. Bye.